What's up, everybody? Welcome into episode 2 of the By the Horns podcast on the Chicago Sports Network. We are brought to you by Toyota. And remember that Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive than any other brand. So find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. Okay, Drew, my man, Drew Stevens, Southside, Cam Smith, West Side. Let's get into this thing, man, because you have a team in the Bulls preseason-wise that showed some better performances, right, individually as a whole, but then also team-wise. So we're going to unpack the last couple of games for this Bulls team, going back to last Saturday against the Memphis Grizzlies. And you look at this team in terms of what they were able to do individually. And we got to start off with Zach LaVine, who is the leader and star of this team. And let's just provide some context for our viewers and our listeners. Memphis Grizzlies didn't play Ja Morant or Desmond Bane or Jaren Jackson Jr. A lot of their stars and starters and rotational guys did get minutes in this ball game, but nonetheless, we saw some things from this Bulls team that opened up some eyes. And as I mentioned, starting with Zach LaVine, 28 points, a man that was really on his job early on. Drew, it felt like to me that Zach wanted to, one, show everybody that he was healthy, but then also, two, remind people that he still knows how to do this, right? I mean, he was efficient with his shot from different areas of the floor. We saw the tough shots that Zach is accustomed to making. And then we also saw Zach show that he still has that Zach LaVine athleticism with some dunks as well. So what were some of your biggest takeaways from Zach in that performance in preseason game number 2 for the Bulls?
I think it was just that, Cam, the efficiency. You know, he was 9 or 12 from the field, knocked down all 6 of his threes. He was hitting catch and shoots, was hitting turnarounds off the bounce. He abused Scottie Pippen Jr. one time on a fast break, just kind of gave him a little chicken wing. And
it felt like that was a little personal too, maybe because that game was in the United Center.
Yeah.
And knowing that Pippen Jr. was on the back of that jersey, I'm not saying that Zach took it personally, but it just felt like little things were taken to another level.
Yeah, and Scottie was doing some flopping out there too. He had another incident where he kind of stripped the ball away from Zach and did another little flopping performance when Zach was trying to get the ball back from him. So, you know, they had a little thing going during the game. But no, Zach, he looked great. He looked like the Zach of old. And it's good to see, not just for what that means for this team that wants to get out and run, that needs guys to play off of Josh Giddy, but also just a bigger picture in terms of other teams looking at him and maybe trying to get the front office to, you know, look their way and make a trade later on this season.
Yeah. So you have a lot of different things to unpack with that performance from Zach on so many different levels, as you mentioned, right? From just him, again, showing what he can do, right? And there's nothing new, right? When Zach LaVine is healthy, he is one of the better scorers in the NBA, and that's a fact. Let's just not play any games with that. But then also, too, when you need to make those tough shots, he's done that time and time again in that Bulls uniform. But also, again, let's just be real about it. We've heard his name in those rumored trade things that were going on last season, some things in the offseason. So if there was a point where it comes to a deal on the table, then some teams are looking at Zach LaVine saying that he could be a piece for them. But for right now, as we record this podcast and do this show, Zach LaVine, that number 8 jersey, is still in that Bulls uniform. And so we're going to cherish him until we can't anymore. But we're not trying to rush Zach out of here at all, man, because, again, he's still one of the best scorers in the NBA. And he proved that, as I mentioned, last Saturday against the Memphis Grizzlies with those 28 points. But there were some other guys that really stepped up that I was surprised to see them do their job like that. And I'm going to say Julian Phillips, because I sat down with Julian media day and he was telling me things that he worked on in the offseason and his shot preparation and the amount of shots that he put up. But when I saw him in the corners and working the corners, he was 5 of 8 from 3 against the Memphis Grizzlies. The majority of those 5 threes came from the corners, whether it was on the left side or the right side, but it was just a quick catch and a quick shot, Drew. So Julian Phillips was one of those guys outside of that starting group that really opened my eyes, because you have a guy that really fits the mold of what Billy Donovan wants to do. He's young, he's athletic, he can get up and down, he can defend, and he can knock down shots from the perimeter. And that was very evident in that game against the Memphis Grizzlies. So Julian, for me, is a guy that understands what the opportunity is for himself in a very, in my opinion, crowded forward group. When you think of Julian Phillips, Dalen Terry, Patrick Williams, Modest Buellis, right? You have a lot of names in that group that could demand a lot of minutes, but he made sure that he made an impact really on both ends. And it's not just, again, like as I mentioned, what he was able to do from three, but you look at defensively what Julian Phillips was able to do as well. I mean, you talking about a guy that I wish this could get charted, as a basketball player, but deflections and closeouts, right? Having those active hands. And those are the little things that head coaches and coaching staffs look at to try and provide minutes for you, saying that, hey, just his activity alone allows us to get out and be our best. So for me, it was Julian Phillips. What about you? What did you see from Julian that stood out for you?
Man, he just is looking more and more like a Derrick Jones Jr. archetype, and possibly one that has an even sweeter shooting stroke. Obviously, this is just a preseason. We need to see more evidence of this. We need to see him continue to knock down these shots because that's a swing skill, right? This team wants to shoot more threes and wants to get them up just so that the math problem that they've had the last couple of years is not so wide. It's not such of a big margin for them. And him knocking down that three can get him on the court. Like you mentioned that forward room, the potential for guys like Torrey Craig and Matas Buellis to push Patrick Williams. If he's knocking down that three, he's going to be in the game because he's got the motor, he's got the defense, he's got the energy. Another one of the guys that gets in the game and he just kind of makes things happen just because he's in the right place at the right time more often than not. So, that's one of the things we're going to continue to look forward to as the season goes on is this real? He's been working with Peter Patton. Can he be another Peter Patton success story like Ayo Dosunmu last year?
Yeah. But the biggest thing on that is just the floor spacing, right? So you want to have a guy that can knock down threes because it just opens up things for a Zach LaVine or Kobe White, even a Josh Giddy. And we've seen Josh Giddy make so many plays at that point guard position with his size. And that was one thing for me, looking at Josh Giddy, what he's been able to do as a point guard, not just with OKC in this NBA time, but then also with his Bulls team, is that he's able to attack downhill, Drew, and really be able to suck the defense in terms of the awareness that they have with him with the basketball and getting those deep paint touches. Yeah. But at 6'8", it allows him to make that habit pass, right? Two corners, opposite corners, or also out to the wings. And if Julian Phillips is showing that he can knock down threes from the corner, well, that's an easy pass for a guy like Josh Giddy at 6'8". That's one of the better passes in the NBA. So we have to remember that all of these guys, especially in the NBA, but more so since we're talking about the Bulls, this is our team, that they're aware of certain guys' tendencies. They know the scouting report. So don't get it twisted and don't think that Julian Phillips, once he saw the trade for Josh Giddy from Alex Caruso, that he started preparing himself, understanding that with a player like Josh Giddy, he's got to be shot ready. And if you're a hooper out there, you know what shot ready means. Have those hands ready, get that basketball prepared to knock down a shot. And so that was, again, one of those things on Saturday for Julian Phillips that really stood out was his shot preparation and his non-hesitation on those shots. And, of course, he can do his athleticism thing, right? We saw that on the fast break when he had arguably the best dunk that we've seen from one of the Bulls this preseason. In fact, we saw a few dunks, even with Zach LaVine, as we talked about before, showing his athleticism. But Julian Phillips understands that he has the opportunity, Drew, to really get some serious minutes off of this bench and in that rotation for Billy Donovan.
Yeah, it was funny, kind of piggybacking off of your point about the dunks that we saw. We were talking to Zach in the locker room after the game, and he mentioned how Matas and Julian, they're having these dunk offs after practice, and Zach is kind of looking.
Oh, word.
Yeah, man.
Okay. All right. So you coming with some exclusive then, huh, Drew?
You can say that.
Okay. All right.
No, but Zach was, talking about them having these dunk offs, and that he's looking at it. He was like, yeah, you only got so many of them. And someone asked him, can you still do that? And he said, yeah, I definitely can, but I'm kind of saving him for the game. And he's more worried about his jump shot right now. But that athleticism on this team is different than what we've seen in years past. And hopefully it can lead to fun basketball, man. This team getting out on the break and running. I feel like we rarely have seen this team the past two seasons, like throwing alley-oops and just having vertical threats on the floor. So that'll be kind of cool to see if they can take advantage of Josh Giddy's vision and the athleticism that they have on the wings.
And it fits the model and the MO for Billy Donovan with this group. He wants to run. He wants up-tempo offense. He wants to defend the three, because if you defend the three and those shots are missing, long rebounds are happening, which helps you ignite a fast break. So when you have guys like Josh Giddy at the point or Zach LaVine for sure that can get out in the open court with the basketball and make plays, Kobe White, Julian Phillips, Ayo Dosunmu, like those are all players that can put the ball on the deck in transition and make plays. Not so much Julian Phillips. I haven't seen too much of that yet, but I'm sure that his ball handling is to the point where if he catches the basketball in transition, a couple of dribbles or a few dribbles to get himself to the rim, he's more than capable of doing that. And if you need more film, then run it back to the Summer League with Julian Phillips. But then also if you want a deeper pull from that, go back to his days at Tennessee when he was putting in work for the Volunteers. So you have so many different dynamics that could really help this Bulls team with just some success, right? And really getting on top of teams. And that was the case that we saw against the Memphis Grizzlies on Saturday. Now, unfortunately, the Bulls did not win that game. They lost 124-121. Possible opportunity for Talen Horton-Tucker to tie the game. Half-court heave didn't go, but it is what it is, though. And so we'll get into the Talen Horton-Tucker conversation when we transition to the game against the Milwaukee Bucks that happened Monday night. So it was surprising, and I'm just going to be honest, Drew, and Bulls fans and basketball lovers that are listening or watching our show right now. I didn't think for a Bucks team that played their starters, that were at home, and were facing a Bulls team that didn't play any starters, that the Bulls, let's just be real, were in full control of that first half. I know it's a 4-quarter ball game. It's 2 halves to a basketball game. But what we saw from that group and the names that we mentioned in the previous game against the Memphis Grizzlies, Josh Giddy, Julian Phillips, Matas Buellis, Adama Sanogo, Drew, who outplayed Brook Lopez, 16 points, 15 rebounds against Brook Lopez. And let's just be real. We know that probably Giannis and Brook and Dame, even though they were out there on the floor, it was more cardio, right? I mean, they're going to get their shots up, but it would be a different type of energy, I'm sure, if this was a regular season game. But you got to give credit to Adama Sanogo showing up and putting in work as a double-double guy, and guy that we know in his time at UConn, especially with the Bulls, too, that he's just a force at times on that glass and inside of that paint. But you fast forwarded to this team that had an opportunity to get a preseason win, Drew. And what do you think about just what this team was able to do in that first half, especially some of the young guys?
I think it was just fun. It was something different, guys that we haven't seen play a lot. So there's something kind of intriguing about not knowing what certain people are going to do when they're put in different positions that they wouldn't ordinarily be in on this team. When you have Zach and Pat and Vooch and Kobe and Ayo and Jalen Smith out, it gives these guys a chance to fit in roles that, they will play possibly, and give themselves a chance to show the coaching staff what they can do maybe outside of those roles. But it was fun to watch. Adama Sanogo, man, what he lacks in height and athleticism, he certainly makes up for with his ability to just attack the offensive glass with reckless abandon. I mean, I think he averaged something like 12 rebounds in the G League. Half of those were like offensive rebounds. He has a knack for finding the ball. Reminds me a little bit of Andre Drummond. Obviously, he's not the athlete, doesn't have the height on him that he does, but just the way that he tracks the ball and can get multiple possessions for this team. It was fun to watch, man. Julian, again, knocked down threes in the corner. A couple times where I thought he may have rushed his shot, but it started off looking pretty good. And unfortunately left the game with a rib contusion. So we'll have to check back later and see what's going on with that. But all in all, aside from them losing their ball game, just seeing different guys, seeing what they can do on the floor with the minutes that Billy gave them tonight. And guys are fighting for that 15th roster spot and that last two-way contract.
Yeah, we saw 12 players in rotation for Billy Donovan. And so here's the starting 5 for that Bulls team in that loss against the Milwaukee Bucks, who, again, I said we're in full control in that first half. And, again, we know that it's 4 quarters, 2 halves to a basketball game. But for this group, it was very impressive, though. Dalen Terry, Julian Phillips, Bidham, Adama Sanogo, and Josh Giddy, who had 12 points and 5 assists. But another one of those bright spots for this Bulls team, not even in that starting 5, but I kind of teased this a little bit and mentioning this name, and Chicago native and Simeon great, Talen Horton-Tucker, who it feels like it feels like Talen was born to score, not just born to play basketball, but born to score basketball. And you just think of how he is able to get his buckets. He scored in double figures every single preseason game. And you can't blame him. One, because it's just who he is. He's always been a bucket throughout his career, but especially in the NBA. You saw it in his time with the Los Angeles Lakers. You saw it in his time with the Utah Jazz. Even though in minimal minutes, he still was a double-figure scorer. But tonight was one of those examples of just him coming in, knowing what his job is. But then also, let's be real about it, Drew. It's 15 spots on an NBA roster. And Talen is one of those names that's fighting for that 15th spot on this NBA roster. And for a guard group that is heavy when you think about Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu, Josh Giddy, Lonzo Ball, who we'll get into before we finish up this podcast, that's a pretty stacked guard group. But if you can have a guy that can come in and maybe ignite your offense to score a little bit, well, Talen Horton-Tucker, who is only 23, which is still wild because we remember covering him as Simeon Career Academy, and it feels like he's been in the NBA 10 years, but still only 23. But he is one of those guys, all three levels, can get you buckets. But then we're starting to see more of him playmaking for others. That's important. So kind of similar to anybody that can score the basketball. When a guy's in a rhythm, the defense starts to focus on them even more, which opens up opportunities for other guys for open shots or drives to the rim off of passes and, swings.
Absolutely. He was like barreling into the paint, especially the game on Saturday that lost to the Grizzlies. The amount of times that he was just able to get into the paint and whether or not he was finishing at the rim or just kind of spraying out to shooters, it was kind of amazing to watch, man. He uses that big frame of his. He goes about, 6'4", 235, 240. So it's hard to kind of stay in front of him without fouling. He just kind of moves you out of the way. Yeah. Billy wasn't ready to commit to him yet in terms of, this is the guy we want to give this last roster spot to. He mentioned that this week him and the front office would sit down and talk about that in terms of what they're going to look for. They obviously have a lot of guards on this roster, but he is the most ready-made player in terms of, himself, the E.J. Liddell's, the Kenny Lofton Jr. So it'll be interesting to see what direction they go with that 15th roster spot. But he certainly put himself in a position with as much as he can control to make this team.
Yeah, the Bulls have another preseason game on Wednesday and then next Friday against the Cleveland Cavaliers, again, who they beat in their first preseason game. That'll wrap up the preseason for this Bulls team. So 5 games in total. But Talen Horton-Tucker is one of those guys that, Drew, he's going to go down to the wire and really put pressure on Billy Donovan and his coaching staff and really the front office to make a decision on if he stays or if he's elsewhere. But from what we've seen so far from Talen, it's just been, again, who he is, a guy that can score buckets. But again, it's another ball handler on the floor. It's another guy that can just find his spots and get to his spots, whether getting to the rim or just making plays for others. So I think those are all things that Billy Donovan is taking into account. But another thing that I'm sure Billy is taking into account is, can Talen defend? And that's a big question, because if you're going to be a 15th guy on an NBA roster, and if you're going to be a guy that's going to be plugged in for a igniter, spark plug type of role, then it's great that you can score, but you got to give a little something on the defensive end, right? So you have to justify those minutes that you're getting on the floor. And scoring, we've seen this time and time again in the NBA. We know that there are guys that just score. They don't play no damn defense. They just score. But when they score at a very high level, and it really helps that team. So Talen is one of those players in his career, as young, and I'm putting up air quotes right now for people listening into the podcast, at only 23. He's just game experience, right? He's a veteran in those situations of just being out there on the court, because he played with one of the greatest of all time in LeBron James under that microscope that are the LA Lakers out there in Hollywood. So you have a guy that understands who he is in the league, but then also what he can bring to this team. So it'll be even more eyes on Talen Horton-Tucker in the final 2 preseason games for the Bulls. Now, we didn't dive too deep on Matas Buellis in the Memphis Grizzlies game last Saturday, and I did that on purpose, Drew, if you didn't notice, because we were praising Matas and just what his mentality is, his crazy confidence, which is good. Like, I'm not knocking him for having crazy confidence because you need that. I think overall in this league, you need to have that to be successful, but then also, two, to have that time and match up against guys. Struggled against the Grizzlies, 1 of 9, only 5 points. But the great thing about Modest is that he has short-term memory.
Yes.
We saw it Monday night against the Milwaukee Bucks, against Giannis Antetokounmpo, where he was matched up a lot against Giannis, and he was going right at him, Drew. I mean, finished with 15 points, and he did at his first true highlight dunk of his career, even though it's preseason, but he got the and one dunk on Giannis. So it's one of those things where you see a guy in Modest, as young as he is, he just turned 20. In fact, happy belated birthday to Modest Buellis. M14, that's the nickname that I'm going with because that's the nickname that his teammates gave him, but just turned 20. But a young dude that wants to have as much experience and go up against the best so he can learn and get better. And you love a guy like that. I'm not going to call him a kid, but you love a guy like that wants to be thrown into the fire or thrown into the water and is really sink or swim. But what we've seen from Modest, especially against the Milwaukee Bucks, was him swimming and really getting into his jumper from 3, right? You talked about Peter Patton, and he always puts in work after practice with shooting drills with Peter Patton. Also, his mid-range game, and we know the athleticism is always going to be there for him, so he can get to the rim.
Yeah, man. That bravado of his, I think, although he didn't have a great game Saturday, you saw him block Zach Edey from behind and then stare him down and point at him. Like, it feels so Chicago, man. I'm trying to remember.
I'm glad you said that. Because Modest Buellis is so Chicago, and he's such a hooper that if people look at his right leg and you see that tattoo on his right leg, it's a basketball going in a hoop. Now, Drew, we come from a certain era, man. Like, we 80s babies and came up in the 90s when tattoos started to pick up, right? And shout out to Dennis Rodman for making it more acceptable in the NBA to have tattoos and just be just proud of it.
Yeah.
But that tattoo that he has on his right leg, when I first saw it, I'm like, wait a minute. What cloth is this dude cut from? Because it started throwing me back to like the old school and one days. You remember the old school and one t-shirts? Absolutely. And I know I'm dating this right now, Drew. I already did it because I said we 80s babies. But the old school and one t-shirts and to have that tattoo, I'm like, oh, Modest is a hooper. He's not just a hooper. He's a hooper. But I'm glad that you said that he is so Chicago because it's that confidence. I'm not going to say crazy confidence because Chicagoans are so confident, but it's one of those things for basketball players from Chicago. It's like, look, I don't care about anybody else on this court. In my opinion, I'm the best. My team is the best, and I'm going to go out and prove that. And that's what Modest has.
He definitely does. And to your point earlier, he showed it Monday, taking on that challenge of guarding Giannis. Now, he did end up fouling out, and 3 of those fouls came against Giannis.
Preseason. We'll take it. It's preseason.
But we've come to expect this type of attitude from him. He's not going to back down. He doesn't care who he's playing against. And obviously, his rookie year, most rookies, is going to be an ebb and flow to it. You're going to have games where they look incredible. Then you're going to have other games where they clearly look like they've never played in the NBA before. It's just the way things go. Once he starts learning, opponents' tendencies and maybe little tricks of the trade that he may be able to get away with, and he starts to put some weight on, the sky's the limit for him. Billy Donovan has said as much. His teammates have said as much. Al Dosunmu said he can make the argument that Modest is the most athletic guy on the team, and that's saying something. We talked about a little while ago the dunk-offs that are happening at the Advocate Center on practice days, and we know the athlete that Zach LaVine has shown himself to be and that he still is. So I think, again, man, number 11th overall pick, but he's going to try to show people that he shouldn't have fallen to the Bulls, even though obviously Bulls fans are grateful that he did. Right. And I think he's I gotta say, he's probably the most exciting part about this upcoming season.
Oh, okay.
I think in my opinion, I think I would say that.
I like where you're going with that. Where you're going with that because it's really a look when you watch Modest and you see him play and compete, you're thinking future, right? And so for sure he's part of that future, and he better be. He was a 11th overall pick from last summer's NBA draft, but there was also conversation a few months before the draft and even almost 6 months before that he was in consideration for that number 1 overall pick. So that's how highly scouts and GMs and people in the know thought of Modest and what he can be. But the basketball gods blessed us, Drew. Thank you, basketball gods. Thank you, Michael Jeffrey Jordan, for allowing Modest to land to the Chicago Bulls at 11, because you can see what he can become. And it's a guy that wears that Bulls logo, wears that Chicago across his chest proudly, and does not care who you are. He wants to go right at you. And you don't see that too often in today's NBA. And let's just be real about it. To me, I mean, we're cut from a different cloth. It's a little too buddy-buddy in certain situations. But Modest wants to go right at you. Yeah, we might be cool off the court, but on the court, you're in my way. And so that's the thing for him that's going to set him apart and really take him down a longer road than some other people, you know, barring health, right? But also a guy that's going to continue to add to his game. But when he is challenged, he accepts that challenge and wants to get better, because at the end of the day, he knows that he's going to learn and grow from that. Like, I wouldn't have been surprised if Modest leaving Pfizer Forum Monday night against the Bucks was on the bus, watching tape, watching things on how he can get himself better in preparation for Wednesday night against the Minnesota Timberwolves. So Chicago, we got one. I said it on my social media posts with Modest. I really believe that we got one, because this is a dude that knows how to play, and he's going to grow in that basketball IQ. But for what he can bring in his role, and also understanding how competitive that grouping is, that forward grouping, and we mentioned the names: Patrick Williams, Torrey Craig, Julian Phillips, Dalen Terry. Modest is in that group and trying to force his way onto that court. So when you have those fire igniters in yourself, then when you get out there, you want to make sure that Billy Donovan and his staff give you even more minutes so you can stay out there. And Bulls fans, if they haven't fallen in love with him already, if you haven't watched preseason or even when winding it back to Summer League, trust me, you will see some nice stuff from Modest Buellis. And I'm talking about head taps, jumping on people. And that's what Modest Buellis can bring, but also just that young, kind of youthful, just wild energy. Like, he doesn't care. He does not care. All he cares about is that Chicago Bulls team and getting the Chicago Bulls win. So those are definitely some names for this team that have stood out in the first few preseason games. When you talk about Talen Horton-Tucker, Modest Buellis, Julian Phillips, I can't throw Zach LaVine into that conversation, because we know what Zach is and what he does. And he was showing that against the Memphis Grizzlies last Saturday. And Zach was not on the floor, really no starters for the Bulls on the floor for them against Milwaukee. So it sets them up for Wednesday night, Drew, because we got the reports from ESPN's Shams Charania that Lonzo Ball will make his first return to the basketball court in 2.5 years with the Chicago Bulls. And we know the story of Lonzo just undergoing 3 intricate and detailed surgeries on his knee that continue to give him trouble. He's finally worked himself back to a point to be able to get on an NBA court. And the great thing about this, Drew, and I love that they wanted to do it this way, and I'm sure Lonzo wanted to do it as well, that his first steps back on the court will be inside the United Center. And it's going to be a special moment for him and also Bulls fans. So when you got the news and you read the news about Lonzo returning back on Wednesday, I know you're just like, no matter what it is, minutes-wise or production-wise, you just want to see him back on the court and just give him a round of applause, man, because he went through a lot just to get back to this point.
Absolutely, man. It's not even from a basketball standpoint. It's just a human interest. I want to see my brother, persevere and, conquer these trials that he's gone through the last 2.5 seasons trying to make it back to the court. I know, I'm probably willing to bet that the United Center faithful, the Madhouse on Madison, is going to be rocking for him whenever he gets in the game. I'm expecting a standing ovation. Interested to see what his reaction is, after the game. I plan on asking him how his nerves were being back on the court and real kind of game live action. But we've been waiting for this for a long time.
Yeah.
He's been through so much, the doubters, the setbacks, the wanting to be ramped up, but then not being able to be ramped up. Stephen A. saying that he can't walk, he can't stand, and going through all of that. So I'm sure for him, it's going to be a very special moment. and I'm looking forward to being there Wednesday and watching it go down.
Yeah, it'd be a special moment for him, man. I wonder if Zoe cracks a little smile, maybe a little chuckle as he walks into the court, because I know he's going to feel that love from Chicago Bulls fans and everybody inside the United Center, and probably even feel it from people watching the game as well. Because, again, this is one of those guys in one of those situations where you don't care what uniform he's in, what team he plays for, what his name is. When you hear about his story and you hear about somebody's journey back and they continue to fight their way back and they run into obstacle after obstacle after obstacle and they finally overcome it and you see them back doing something that they love, you gotta support that, man. You gotta cheer that on. So we are fortunate to be able to have Lonzo Ball back for this Bulls team, and I'm just excited to see what he looks like on the court. I'm gonna look at his movements. I want to see, what his reads are off the pick and roll. But the great thing about Lonzo that's always separated him from a lot of point guards, even back when he was back at Chino Hills in high school, is that his basketball IQ, his mental is so superb. And yes, I use the word superb because that's what it is. He can make a team go. And I'm not expecting Lonzo to be every possession, push the basketball in transition, make a lot of hard cuts off ball screens, but I want to see him more so off those ball screens, move the basketball, maybe find that rolling big or a pick and pop, and work in tandem with a couple of guys. I'm curious to see if Ayo Dosunmu will be in the lineup. Remember, he suffered that shoulder stinger against the Memphis Grizzlies last Saturday. He didn't play in the Bulls' loss against the Milwaukee Bucks on Monday night. I want to see how he works in tandem with Zach LaVine if Zach plays. Also, maybe possibly Josh Giddy, and seeing what that combo could look like. But again, I don't see Lonzo playing anything over 15 minutes. If we had to set it at 15 minutes, I would take the under on that. Mm-hmm. I think that Billy Donovan and the coaching staff, and more so the medical team, wants to make sure that he feels good, he looks good, and also, too, that he's not being overplayed with minutes, and that's not going to happen with him. But I can see 10 to 15 minutes for Lonzo Ball. What about you, Drew?
Yeah, I'll probably go closer to that 10-minute mark. These are uncharted waters for everybody involved. So this thing is going day by day, probably play by play.
Literally play by play. Yeah.
Checking in with him. I'm interested to see, how he does fighting over screens, moving laterally when defending the ball. These are things that he's talked about, maybe not having the same athleticism he had before to do. So to see how he's moving around on the court in those particular areas is something that I'm going to be paying close attention to. But again, it's going to be a special moment, special night. He is responsible for my last drink of Bulls Kool-Aid in the first half of 21-22. So,
remember what he was.
Man.
Remember how dynamic Lonzo was with that team. And people, before you start running back the Lonzo Ball highlights, and we actually encourage you to do it, but let's just taper expectations a little bit. He's not going to step on the court and be that guy that we saw having the Bulls being the number one team, the best team in the Eastern Conference record-wise, and what they were able to do, and just a lot of fast break highlights and plays. It's a different team. It's a different Lonzo. But still, you expect him at some point throughout the season to show some flashes of that guy in those first 30 games in that Bulls uniform that had the city on fire, that had that big smile on people's faces, because they're just like, man, his IQ, his passing, and again, the overall fun that brings to basketball, right? Kids, passing the ball is fun in transition. Making the easy play and passing ahead, that's a pretty good thing, because you're putting your teammates in a position to score and have a better opportunity. So I'm with you, man. I'm with you.
Yeah, as someone who grew up as just as much of a Penny Hardaway fan as maybe Michael Jordan, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Passing the basketball can be a remarkable, fun thing for sure.
Yeah, definitely get that, man. So again, Lonzo Ball returning back to the United Center for the first time, 2.5 years. He will play against the Minnesota Timberwolves inside of the United Center. It's going to be a special time. I'm excited to be in the building for that. Drew Stevens is going to be in the building for that. So many people will be there. And I wouldn't be shocked that it will be a crazy media scrum post-game for Lonzo, because people want to just hear how he feels. It's not even just about how he played, but how he feels. How did the knee feel? How did it feel on certain movements, or when he started to accelerate possibly on a fast break? So that those basketball instincts will kick in, Drew. And Lonzo's just gonna be like, you know what knee? Let me just go ahead and give the fans a little bit, because we've heard Billy Donovan and some of his teammates talk about how good he's looked in training camp, right? Mm-hmm. And so those are all positive signs for Lonzo that we're excited for, man. So it's going to be really something that Bulls fans should be excited about. And that's just going to be the word on Wednesday is excitement. So put it in all caps and put it at the front of your mind. But we got 3 preseason games down for the Bulls. They are 1-2, as I mentioned, to beat the Cleveland Cavaliers to start preseason. Follow that up with a couple of back-to-back losses, but still some good signs individually that we saw from this team, but then also from the reserves that we saw in the first half against the Milwaukee Bucks Monday night. So there's a clear indication that this team is going to fight for and scrap for every single thing out there on the basketball court. And that's something that Billy Donovan and Arturas Karnisovas want to prove to the city of Chicago, that this team is not laying down. They want to get after it and show that this team is going to embody what Chicago culture is, what it means to be a basketball player having Chicago or Bulls across their chest, Drew.
Yeah, I feel like you just described Matas Buellis, man. That's the number one reason right there, man. That's the guy we looking to. There's a reason why Bulls Twitter was on fire when Billy Donovan even suggested that Matas might spend some time in the G League. They want to see Matas on the court. They want to see what he can do. Right. They want to see that development. They know that he needs to develop off the floor, his routine, his regiment, get stronger, all of that stuff. But they want to see this man playing. And I think that given these first 3 preseason games, I don't think we're going to see too much of Matas in the G League. I think he's going to be up here with the big boys, learning and growing as we hope that he would.
Yeah. And that's something that's encouraging, too, if he stays up with his team and doesn't spend time in the G League. But also people have to remember that if you're going to the G League, which could happen for Matas for a stint or two, it's not like it's a demotion. It's more so for Billy Donovan and this coaching staff to have Matas get more reps, right? Because, again, you have to remember who's on this team. You have Zach LaVine. You have Kobe White. You have Ayo Dosunmu. You have Nikola Vucevic. You have guys that know how to score and know how to get to their spots. And it's a pecking order. Let's just be real about it. It's a pecking order in terms of who gets shots in the flow of the offense, right? I would rather have Zach LaVine taking those tough shots and shot clock going down, or just making plays for himself than others, or continuing to rely on Matas Buellis to do that. If you have to do that, then that's a bigger concern than what it should be. So it should be guys like Zach LaVine or Kobe White or Nikola Vucevic or Ayo Dosunmu or Josh Giddy making plays for themselves or others. But also it's something that Matas can take on himself and learning from those guys, which he is, because he considers everybody his vet. He's trying to, as in his words, steal as much information that he can from his vet so he can get better. And that's what you want from a young 20-year-old that just wants to prove himself in the NBA, but make sure that he carries Chicago on his back. And he's trying to do his best part of that so far, even though it's the preseason. But it's been great to see Matas, but also just guys like Julian Phillips and, of course, Josh Giddy in that Bulls uniform doing their thing. And we didn't touch on Josh Giddy so much throughout this conversation, Drew, but when you look at him and his performances the first few games, now remember he came into training camp with that tendon injury in his foot that he suffered during the Olympics. What have you seen from Josh Giddy that stood out to you?
I think just how crafty he is. He's not, he doesn't have the quickest feet in the world, but he's able to use his body, use his angles. He doesn't so much get past his defender as he does kind of use his body to nudge him, and he plays the glass pretty well. So I think that's standing out to me a lot. And then just the way he kicks the ball out off of those drives. And he has not been hesitant to shoot the three. Now, before Monday, he was shooting, as we know, Josh Giddy to shoot, which is to say that he struggled. I think he's like 1 of 6, 1 of 7. But Monday, he came out, shot 3 or 4 from 3. And again, he looks comfortable shooting the ball. He's not turning down open shots like sometimes we see guys do for whatever reason, whatever case may be. But, again, that's going to be something that if he can knock that three down, it's going to make this team look better. It's going to make him look better, obviously, and it can be a reason why this team maybe does better than what people have expectations for it to do. But again, we'll see. It's one game.
Yeah.
And we got two more preseason games.
2 more, yeah.
And then things get going next week, Wednesday in New Orleans.
Yeah. And I think Josh Giddey's in a good position to learn and really get better as a shooter because he has a lot of great examples like Lonzo Ball, who really pushed himself and worked himself into a serious three-point threat, a guy that shot over 40% from three, and that wasn't really his game coming into the NBA. So he worked himself into a three-point threat. But also you have guys like Kobe White that can knock down threes. And we mentioned Peter Patton, the Bulls shooting coach, who is continuing to work with players to get them better and put them in positions to be more of a threat from the arc. But one thing that I did notice from Giddy Monday night against the Bucks is that he's stepping into his shot more with aggression, off the swings, right, off dribble penetration when that ball is reversed over to him, whether it's left or right wing. But it felt like he was more comfortable from the right wing and knocking down shots. But it's the shot preparation, is him really aggressively stepping into his shot and letting it fly. So as that goes on, he knows that those opportunities will be there because let's just be real. NBA teams and NBA opponents have the scouting report on Josh Giddey. When that ball is reversed and swung out to him, the urgency on the closeout will not be there. They're going to say, hey, Giddy, you got to prove to us that you can knock down that shot. And until he can prove that he can knock down that shot, then teams will have submit in their gym shoes. They won't close out to him as much because they're looking at that as a missed shot opportunity, an opportunity for them to run. But what we saw Monday, as you mentioned, 3 or 4 from 3 against the Bucks, is the Josh Giddey that can really add another layer to this Bulls offense and really attack. Because at 6'8", if he's getting defenders that's running out at him, what do we know of Josh Giddey? He's going past them, can make plays at the rim, or for others with that habit pass and just finding guys. So the game will open up for him even more, and he knows this when he knocks down those shots. And if we can get that version of Josh Giddey that we saw against the Milwaukee Bucks from the perimeter, then there should be some nice plays happening and the scoreboard lighting up for this Bulls team. All right, but that's going to do it for this By the Horns podcast brought to you by Toyota. And remember that Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive than any other brands. Find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. That's my man, Drew Stevens. I'm Cam Smith. We got 3 Bulls preseason games down. Got a couple more to go. Drew, we getting closer to that regular season start, my guys. So we're getting there. But Bulls fans, we'll be back to you again for episode 3. Thanks for tapping in with us with the By the Horns podcast on Chicago Sports Network.